Hello, everyone. Good afternoon and good evening. My name is Mehmet Kılıç, and I'm honored to be the moderator of today's event. I would like to wish you all a very warm welcome to today's panel discussion on the US immigration agenda under the Biden administration. This event is organized by the Journalists and Writers Foundation on the occasion of the World Refugee Day 2021. The Journalists and Writers Foundation has a long-standing history of assisting asylum seekers from all over the world who are escaping persecution, prosecution, arbitrary detention and arrest, and unfair imprisonment. This event is organized following the call of the UN High Commissioner for Refugees to showcase during the Refugee Day what our communities and our country is doing to assist and include asylum seekers and refugees. As you know, June 20th, which is Sunday, marks the World Refugee Day, a day that promotes the rights of the refugees, asylum seekers, and also internally displaced persons, stateless, and returnees worldwide. Did you know that every minute, 20 people are leaving everything behind to escape war, persecution, or terror? Conflict and persecution have currently forced more than 80 million people around the world to flee their homes. So the question is, what can our communities do to help? And what can the United States do to help? Today's panel discussion will discuss, and we will focus on the US immigration agenda under the Biden administration and the ambitious pledge made to increase the number of refugee admissions to 62,500 by the end of 2021 and 125,000 refugees by 2022. As you know, ahead of the presidential elections of 2020, President Joe Biden pledged and committed to a new US immigration agenda, which reflects the United States' historical tradition of promoting human rights of refugees fleeing their homeland due to violence, domestic war, and political persecution. Today, we will have a distinguished panel of speakers from diverse professional backgrounds who will share their perspectives and insights into the US immigration policy change. Our speakers are experts of immigration law, immigration reforms, and advocates promoting and protecting the human rights of refugees and asylum seekers. We will discuss several topics, including the challenges faced by the Biden administration, to reverse the restrictive immigration policies of the former administration and the new set of rules introduced amid COVID-19 pandemic concerning the admission of refugees. The speakers will also share some best practices and programs by civil society organizations that help with the implementation of the new immigration agenda and welcoming refugees. Now, without further delay, please allow me to introduce and give the floor to our first panelist. Ms. Elizabeth Gibson is a senior staff attorney at the nonprofit New York Legal Assistance Group. She represents asylum seekers, survivors of domestic violence, immigrant families, children, and others in immigration court. Elizabeth also sits on the International Migrant Bill of Rights Initiatives Advisory Board, as well as the New York City Bar Association's Immigration and Nationality Law Committee and Rule of Law Task Force. Elizabeth previously clerked at the New York Immigration Court and worked at the Open Society Justice Initiative, the American Civil Liberties Union, the International Federation of Red Cross, and the US Department of Justice, Treasury, and State. She also worked as a research assistant for the UN Deputy High Commissioner for Refugees and a newspaper reporter. Elizabeth, in your presentation, I would appreciate if you focus on the implications of the US immigration agenda that will impact thousands of asylum seekers and immigration applications, as well as the challenges faced by the immigration lawyers and your members, especially during the COVID-19 pandemic. And also, I would appreciate if you talk about the recommendations made by the New York City Bar Association to the Biden administration. And finally, please elaborate on the introduction of the Funding Attorneys for Indigent Removal Proceedings Act that will aim to increase access to counsel in court proceedings. Elizabeth, it's a pleasure to have you here. Please, you have the floor.
Thank you so much for organizing this wonderful event, and happy Juneteenth to folks here in the United States, and an early World Refugee to everyone. So with regard to that initial question of the implications of the new US immigration agenda, a few weeks ago, I would have said we are still waiting to see, and we still are in large part, but we're finally starting to see some progress. While a lot of the early rhetoric was around day one executive actions and big change from the beginning, the reality is a lot of the early direction on immigration under the new administration initially has just been to pause and reassess, which in fairness, immigration and asylum law in the United States are a massive multi-agency bureaucracy behemoth, and things take time. There also was a sense that the administration wanted to protect against lawsuits challenging any new policies they brought into place, or policies of the last administration that they sought to reverse. And so there's a sense of that they've been taking things a little slow to make sure to do their due diligence and follow proper procedure to protect themselves from any of that. And there's also simply a huge amount of change. We're talking about immigration, refugee, asylum law, and all of these have huge numbers of subcategories to them, run by multiple different agencies in the United States. And part of the reason why we're seeing things take slowly is because for comprehensive immigration reform in the United States, you would need legislative action, and the legislature is very stuck on many things in the United States right now. And so the administration is sort of tackling things bit by bit. I think refugee admissions is an example of how challenging this process has been. Most people, I would say, early in the Biden administration thought increasing the refugee cap, restoring it to what it was before the previous administration would be low-hanging fruit, that there was a lot of popular support for that. And then we didn't see that happen initially. And it was only after a lot of public backlash that we saw them announce that they were going to increase that cap, which I think shows how important it is for the public to speak up on these issues. I'm not going to get too much into talking about refugees now, because I know some of my panelists have wonderful, important information to share on that, as well as at the border. So I'd like to focus on a couple examples of areas where we're seeing progress in other areas that are sort of illustrative of the small changes that are starting to come about but are incredibly important. So on the topic of asylum seekers, those who are fleeing persecution in their country based on race, religion, nationality, political opinion, or membership in a particular social group, which is how asylum is defined here in the United States. One of the most devastating policies of the last administration was a series of attorney general decisions that basically redefined and restricted asylum protections in a way that cut many people fleeing horrific domestic violence situations in their home countries, or situations where they were being persecuted due to family ties. This had a massive impact on claims from all over the world. And I'm happy to say that as of this week, just a few days ago, the administration reversed those decisions. It doesn't fix everything overnight, but the asylum community was pretty much dancing in the streets with joy about those protections being restored for so many families fleeing violence. Another major change in a different area that is just as important is for victims of crime. There's a type of immigration status called U non-immigrant visa that's for victims of crime in the United States who cooperate with law enforcement. The goal is to help immigrants feel safe seeking help if they are in an emergency situation or need protection, and it covers crimes like assault, rape, domestic violence, human trafficking, and others. And the last administration was making it as difficult and risky as possible for people to come forward and seek these kinds of protections. And we're starting to see that reverse piece by piece. One change we saw just this month, again, very recently, was a new policy that would give these survivors work permits while their applications are pending. And this is huge because right now, before this, or currently, the waiting time for these U visas is about 5 years, maybe more, that these applications are pending. And people with these applications pending do not have access to work permits. So imagine a woman living undocumented for 5 years in the United States, unable to work while trying to get back on her feet after a traumatic assault. And she'll now be able to work and have greater security and stability for herself and her family while going through this arduous process. So that's a huge victory. Another thing that's really cross-cutting across all of immigration law here in the United States is something called prosecutorial discretion. It used to be that the government focused its resources on detaining and deporting the most serious cases, and they were willing to negotiate or cooperate on more sympathetic immigration cases. That almost completely ended under the Trump administration with devastating results and the deportation of people who had lived in the United States for decades with families and no criminal record. And again, this policy has just rolled out, but they have brought back prosecutorial discretion to try and return both humanity and just better use of resources in the immigration system. I could probably go on about developments that are emerging all night, but I do want to flag sort of generally that the administration's new regulatory agenda just came out. That's basically their proposals for what we should be seeing in the coming months related to rules that they want to change or revisit. And there are still a lot of questions about the specifics, but it's looking really promising for restoring order, due process, even on some of sort of the nitty-gritty bureaucratic things that aren't exciting, but make a real difference in the adjudication of cases for real individuals. And don't get me wrong, our immigration system is still a mess in many ways, but I'm cautiously optimistic for some improvement. And then I know you also mentioned talking a bit about some of the challenges that we're seeing. And I think one area where there has been a little bit of concern, as I mentioned, sort of things are coming forward a little bit at a time. And part of the challenge with that is that the government has restarted things at the border and in immigration courts, but they haven't finished fixing all of the substantive issues. And basically, if you turn a conveyor belt on at a factory before you fix all the machinery at the factory, you're going to get bad results. It's great that you're finally giving someone their day in court, but if you haven't fixed the rules and laws regulating their case, you're basically just deporting people faster. And we're starting to see promising movement on restoring some of the protections, such as the ones for asylum seekers fleeing domestic violence or based on family persecution that I just mentioned. But that's one area where there's a bit of a challenge. Another difficulty, I think, is in identifying ways to fix damage already done. A lot of good people who would have won their cases under prior administrations got deported under Trump or had their applications senselessly denied. And there's been a lot of trauma and lifelong damage done that a new administration can't simply undo without a time machine. And that's a really serious challenge that takes a lot of creative lawyering and other services and outreach to people. And I think that's going to be something that is being worked on for years to come. And can be seen to some extent with family separation, which I'm sure someone will talk about a bit more later, but we're starting to see families being reunited in the United States who were separated at the border, but it's still really small numbers. And it's just difficult work to do because the way that it was done at the time, because there was so little proper records keeping and accountability for keeping track of children and these families, that it's a very difficult job to reunite them. Another challenge, I think, is going to be capacity. The system is so incredibly backlogged with immigration cases and asylum cases and refugee applications, which I'll talk a bit more about that backlog in a minute, but basically organizations are struggling to keep up with the need for help, despite all of the amazing work being done by nonprofits as well as the private sector to support immigrant and refugee families. And so those organizations continue to need support. I think there's a bit of concern that as people are less anxious and worried and fears from Trump are fading, that people will forget there's still so much work to be done and that these organizations need financial support as well as just manpower to continue working on this. I also wanted to talk, you mentioned recommendations from the New York City Bar Association, and there's a lot. And so I'm just going to focus on one in particular that I think is probably one of the most important issues in immigration law right now. But you can check more on the New York City Bar Association's website. We have a lot of reports on there. It's not to be confused with the New York State Bar Association, which also is very important. But one initiative that we've been pushing for is independent immigration courts. And this sounds like a really bureaucratic, boring thing, but the reality is it has a huge, huge impact on the daily lives of immigrants going through our justice system. In short, the immigration courts are not real courts currently. They're what's called an administrative law court. And without getting too technical, it basically means it's a court housed in the Department of Justice under the Attorney General. And that's a bit problematic because the Attorney General is a political appointee who is also our chief prosecutor against immigrants in the United States. And it's always been a problem, but we, under the last administration, really saw serious concerns raised about political influence interfering with due process in the legal system in immigration courts. So there's an ongoing push to take the courts out of the Department of Justice to make them more independent. It's going to require legislative action, but it is incredibly important and needs everyone's support. And it's important that we keep the momentum going on it again before sort of the memory fades of how difficult things got under the last administration. The City Bar Association has also pushed to include accountability for protecting health of detained immigrant women, protections for survivors of sex and labor trafficking, and increasing the right to counsel, which I'll talk a little bit more later, just to give you sort of a preview of some of the other reports you can look into. Let me see. You also asked about COVID-19 and how that has affected the asylum and immigration process.
Yeah.
So parts,
if you don't mind,
yes,
you just like cover up in a minute. So we will come back to others. Thank you.
Exactly. I'll wrap it up. So all I wanted to say on the effect of COVID-19 is just it's created a huge backlog. Parts of the immigration system have been shut down. So we're looking at 1.3 million pending immigration court cases in the United States, with 150,000 of those in New York alone, for example. We've gone from the average case taking 772 days in 2016 to 1,182 days in this year. And that's the average. There are people who have been in immigration court 10 years and people who get deported before they ever step foot in court. For visas to get into the United States, we have a 500,000 case backlog where the cases are completed, ready to issue the visa, but they just haven't been able to schedule the interview. And a backlog isn't just numbers. That's families separated, employment opportunities missed, and lives that are stuck in limbo for years. And I'll leave things there for a moment, and if there's time to talk about increasing representation for immigrants, I can add that in later or talk about that in Q&A.
Thank you so much, Elizabeth, for your outstanding presentation. And it's good to hear that some of the promises are kept. And of course, there are some more work to do to as you mentioned, in your speech, the victims of crimes, the victims of domestic violence, and the work permits that is being issued. I think there is more work to do, but at least it's progressing, and I think it's important that the civil society and everybody is kind of like pushing the government to do it faster and more efficient way. And now I would like to move on to our next speaker, who is an advocate in this cause. Our next speaker is Kathy O'Callaghan. She's the president and founder of Hearts and Homes for Refugees, the leading refugee organization in Westchester County, New York. Kathy supports and promotes building community sponsorship and convening grassroots around all aspects of welcoming, assisting, and advocating for refugees and asylees. Kathy believes in the transformative power of sharing community resources and founded Hearts and Homes for Refugees in 2015. Kathy was recognized as Pelham Woman of Distinction in 2017 and named Person of the Year by Pelham Civic Association in 2019. Kathy, in your presentation, I would appreciate if you focus on why restoring the U.S. refugee admission program is important to you personally and your organization. Who are your local partners to push this policy change? And what is your strategic planning to welcome and serve the needs of the refugees? And what are some of the challenges that you faced? And finally, if you could elaborate on the community sponsorship model, which could be replicated by other organizations. Thank you. The floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Mehmet, and thank you to the Journalists and Writers Foundation for your global work on issues that are so important regarding refugees. And Hearts and Homes for Refugees is here. We are the local solution, providing a local solution, in our opinion, to the global refugee crisis. It's important because the people who join this effort, like all of you, believe that welcoming refugees is a long-standing humanitarian tradition, and it protects the most basic right, which is the right to live and to live in safety. And it is life-saving. And so our grassroots volunteers and community partners are passionate about this. We understand that accepting refugees and welcoming them here into our communities is a win-win for the country and for the communities that receive them. And we help, and by providing them with the right to work and to health and to education, refugees can start their new lives to become integrated and productive, aspiring Americans. So Hearts and Homes for Refugees is all about welcoming, assisting, and advocating, and we all win when that happens. Who are we? We are first and foremost partners with resettlement agencies and Catholic Charities, and Kelly is an outstanding partner and has been since day one. And it was no small feat that they agreed to come to Westchester County, as did HIAS. And we said, we will build a community of welcomers, and with their help, we have been able to do that. The individuals, volunteers, local faith communities, civic groups, families have stepped up to be part of I'd say a network of 2,000 individuals, 40 groups that welcome refugees here. This dynamic network we created on purpose so that everyone would come out of their silos and that we could de-silo and be collaborative in our support. It strengthens the grassroots efforts, we can share resources, and it's very important because we can educate and inspire if we all come together for more welcomers. This strong network really does amplify our work and our mission to build a welcoming community, and it's a powerful force. And it helps the refugees that we have welcomed in their goals, which is really to be independent Americans. How do we do this? The plan has always been about bringing the community together, and it is called community sponsorship. When the Trump administration saw fewer arrivals, we pivoted from co-sponsorship or community sponsorship with resettlement agencies, and I'm going to go into that in a minute, to a smaller, shorter term program called Helping Hands. And Catholic Charities partners with us in identifying populations of refugees, asylees, and asylum seekers who need short-term boosts in their lives here as resettled refugees. So that has been the focus of our work in the last several years, since 2018 when we started it. There have been few arrivals that have been sponsored. We hope that there will be more in 2021 and 2022. But through our programs, I think that the impact is important to know. We've served over 800 new neighbors from 25 countries. Our volunteers and our partners responded to the COVID pandemic, providing $70,000 in assistance and response, including support for rent and utilities, education, cash assistance. And we have procured and distributed $56,000 worth of goods, from beds and computers to winter coats and school supplies, personal products, and much more. Very important number here. We've engaged individual volunteers and community groups. They have provided over 5,600 hours of service, valued at $164,000. So our volunteers assist with job searches and navigating unemployment, getting driver's permits and licenses, learning English and navigating the health and education system, and so much more. The point here is that it takes a community to welcome refugees in a way that addresses the capacity issue that Elizabeth mentioned. How does the government propose, or how can we resettle new refugees with such limited capacity, especially after the dismantling of the program, previous administration? And we believe that community sponsorship, which is a public-private partnership between US resettlement agencies and local faith and civic groups, as I mentioned, can effectively extend support for refugees, increase their chances of successful integration and independence within the communities where they're placed. So we can assist and be the extension of the resettlement agencies with this community sponsorship model. It will address gaps in the program. The 40-year-old resettlement program has many gaps, and Kelly can address that from her end and knows all too well. And it needs improvement. And under the existing program, if you're a refugee and you arrive here and you're resettled with a case manager and resettlement agency, you basically get 90 days of support, and it's managed through the agencies and the caseworker. They do tremendous work. They are at capacity, and they need help. And I think that what communities can and have done really will increase the capacity and the outcomes for refugees. So we propose more community sponsorships. We look to do that as an organization, both in Westchester County. We're looking to a future of going beyond Westchester County into New York City and to the counties north of Westchester, because the work we do is scalable. It's all about grassroots momentum and building that momentum and identifying the people of goodwill from faith communities, from civic groups who want to do something. We have over, I think I mentioned 40 partners just in Westchester County. And, you know, it's sort of organic. People hear about what we're doing and they say, how can we get involved? And they can come do short-term or long-term commitment work. And we are now a county that has resettled 100 refugees through 12 or 13 different co-sponsor groups. And we look to be doing more of that. It didn't exist 5 years ago. We do now. What else did you want me to talk about? Oh, the challenges. There are so many challenges to resettlement, and community groups that come together face, I'd say, prioritizing the biggest challenges are housing, affordable housing in Westchester County, language, employment, and very often the misperceptions about the impact that refugees have on the economy, et cetera. So our whole mission is defined by four words: welcome, educate. We have to educate the people who and inspire them to want to learn more and to get involved. Convene, bring them together because there's more power in numbers. And advocate for policies and issues that affect refugees that are here and those that would like to be here. So that's our strategy. And long term, we are looking for creating more community sponsors, more welcomers, and longer term sustainable welcoming in our area and hopefully throughout the country. Mehmet, was there anything else? I mean, I don't want to repeat myself.
Yeah, you kind of like covered all my questions, and I want to thank you from the bottom of my heart, because Hearts and Homes is one of my favorite organizations, and your logo with the heart, with the home, you know, welcoming refugees with the heart and the homes is amazing. And also maybe later on during the Q&A session, I would like to hear about how this initiative started in your kitchen around the table with volunteers. I think that could be very interesting to hear for our viewers as well. But thank you so much. Now I would like to move on to our next speakers, Ms. Pınar Çağlayan Erduran. Ms. Pınar Çağlayan Erduran received her bachelor's degree in law from Ankara University School of Law in Turkey, and her LLM degree from University of Southern California Gold School of Law. She is admitted to practice law in New York and with the Ankara Bar Association. Pınar practiced law in Turkey between 2000 to 2006, after which she immigrated to the United States. She is currently practicing immigration law at the law offices of Hani Bushra in Orange County, California. In her practice, Pınar mostly focuses on asylum, removal of defense, immigrant visas, and non-immigrant visas. As an attorney who migrated from Turkey, she strives to help immigrants in their journey to make the United States their home. In your presentation, Pınar, I would appreciate if you could focus on the immigration policies that will be reversed under the Biden administration as a lawyer, and the implications of COVID-19 on immigrant offices and the challenges you face as a lawyer during the pandemic, and what are the difficulties that the immigrants and refugees they faced during the admission processes. And finally, I would appreciate if you could elaborate on the new wave of Turkish nationals who apply for asylum in the US due to the ongoing human rights violations in Turkey after the failed coup attempt in 2016. So basically how this new immigration agenda will impact asylum applications of Turkish asylum seekers and others in the US. Thank you, and the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Hi, everyone. So on January 20, 2021, when Biden administration integrated, they made a study and to see the legal impact of the last 4 years in the legal immigration. So the past 4 years was very difficult, as Elizabeth mentioned, and there was an invisible wall built in the legal immigration. And this invisible wall composed of many facets. So the making legal immigration was very expensive. The immigration fees were raised, and making the process longer and overwhelming to legal immigrants. So new interviews brought and new requirements brought, like fingerprinting or interview requirement for employment-based immigration, and changing the law through the Board of Immigration with the sole purpose of limiting the immigration. So we had many policies changed. I can say that every Friday we were waking up, what is gonna be bad? What bad news are we gonna hear? So the nightmare stopped, thank God. And making the legal immigration available to, I can say, to rich people. So we got the rule like public charge rule, which is limiting the legal citizenship and legal permanent residency for those who are in need of financial help. So the past administration was not really good at implementing the law in a legal way. So many of the rules that they brought was challenged at the court, and there was a big fight in the court with the ACLU, which we support a lot. And so far, the Biden administration did a couple of things, and they have many in the agenda. Actually, Elizabeth mentioned many of them, but I can say that this administration dropped certain legal postures on the fight with the courts. For example, with the public charge rule, so the administration is not fighting, so it left it to the court to decide if there's a violation of the law. And also this administration restored certain things to their old ways. Let's say the citizenship exam, the questions were raised to 20, now it's down to 10 again, back to old ways. And again, as Elizabeth mentioned, 2 days ago, we heard about this decision about the matter of AB. So right now, the restriction on seeking asylum for those who are fleeing from domestic violence or those who are fleeing from the private actors that the government is unable to control, it's now possible. So we are hoping more progress. And also, the biggest reverse maybe was on DACA, which are those dreamers who are brought to United States when they were young. And the first thing that the previous administration did was stopping DACA, and there was a big fight in the court. And the administration did ways to dismantle DACA in a way, and the new administration right now gave us the hope, and right now DACA is in effect again. And also another reverse maybe was NPP, again my friends mentioned. So the previous administration had a rule that asylum seekers, especially from Latin American countries, had to remain in Mexico until their case is being heard by a judge, and a judge gives a decision, and which may take many years. And this was also leaving them in danger in Mexico in ways that they are also new to that country as well. So right now, this administration allows reverse that rule, but there's this Title 42 is a bar still for them to reunite with their family members in the United States, but we are hoping to get some progress on that. Also, this administration rescinded Muslim ban, which was a great progress, which we are so happy about it. Also, another ways that we are happy that this administration stopped border wall construction at all. So also, another big thing was the US Citizenship Act, which covers many new bills for the immigrants to the United States, but the biggest is the Citizenship Path, which is creating a roadmap to citizenship for those undocumented individuals who are in the United States. So the bill allows undocumented individuals to apply for temporary legal status, and 5 years after passing the criminal background checks and paying their taxes, they can be citizens, which is a great, which will be, I hope, a great achievement for those who are in the United States. Which I like with the new administration is the approach to the immigrants. As an immigrant to myself, so we all have those alien numbers, and we are called aliens in the United States, but this administration is going to change this term of alien to non-citizen. What makes, whether you call alien or non-citizen, but I think the approach and the nice way, you feel more welcoming to this unique country. And also this administration aims to keep families together, which is planning on removing the bars to enter into the United States, that 3 or 10-year bar, which is a big, which will be a big good news for those who are separated from their families, who are deported and who are waiting to come back to the United States. So families will be reunited, hopefully. You asked me about the implications of the COVID-19, like on the refugee admissions. As my friends mentioned, so after COVID, many things stopped and consulates are not issuing any immigrant or non-immigrant visas. So this is causing huge delays on the family reunifications. So those who are waiting to be admitted as an asylee to the as a refugee to the United States, they are still waiting. Consulates started issuing their visas, but it's very limited, very slow. There's a huge delay. Also, Title 42 makes it impermissible to seek asylum at the southern border. And so many refugees are waiting there. And of course, COVID is a big bar, but on the other hand, persecution is an ongoing thing. They cannot go back to their countries, and they are in need of seeking asylum. And we believe that the administration can find ways to overturn that Title 42 and accept those asylum seekers to the country. So our hearts are at the southern border for those who are waiting for asylum. Also, delays on the interviews is a big deal for those families to be reunited. So I represent many asylum seekers in the United States, but their family members are back in those countries that they are still facing persecution. So they need to get an interview soon so that they can apply for their family members and they can be reunited. But the delays that were caused by the COVID-19 is a big hit for those who are waiting for interviews. Also, particularly for those Turkish asylum seekers who are fleeing from persecution heavily since 2016, we are so glad that the Biden administration eliminated some of the bars for the asylum seekers because many of those Turkish asylum seekers are coming from third countries. They had to leave Turkey and then go to another country and can able to make it to United States. But there was a proposed bill from the previous administration making it impossible for those asylum seekers. So if you remained in a country for 14 days, or if you stopped two countries prior to coming to United States was a bar for asylum. Thank God Biden administration reversed that policy, which is great for many asylum seekers because on their journey to the United States, they had to go through more than two countries for sure, and they had to remain more than 14 days in many countries. So we are so glad that this administration is not going to follow those proposed bill, and which is great news for Turkish asylum seekers and in general all asylum seekers, I believe. And also, if the bill passes, the Citizenship Act, I'm sure many of the Turkish asylum seekers who couldn't make it to United States will still have some sort of chance if they have family members in the US so they can petition for them. But also you asked me about the difficulties and the hardship that the Turkish asylum seekers are currently facing. I can say that the biggest hardship we have is those delays in the asylum interviews. I want to give an example. In the past, any asylum office was doing 200 or 150 interviews a day. And there was a backlog still back in the day when we started doing interviews in March 2020. But now they are only conducting 10 to 16 interviews a day. So the backlog is huge and I have no idea, and I'm sometimes hopeless how we are gonna process all these asylum interviews, or I don't know if the government can able to find some miracles to conduct these asylum interviews, because we have people waiting for an interview since 2013, 14. So the delay is huge. So this is a big challenge in front of asylum seekers. And especially for those Turkish ones, because if they have family members remaining in Turkey, they are facing for persecution and they can be jailed anytime. And this is a huge risk for them. The wait time is a huge risk for them. And also another challenge we have, the consulates are not really issuing visas abroad. So we're hoping that the COVID restrictions will be lifted soon, and the consulate officers will gonna fasten the process and will gonna do their best to eliminate backlog. So I think that's all that I would like to cover. If we can go further in the Q&A session.
Thank you so much, Pınar, for all this information. And since New York is one of the first stops for many Turkish refugees, so we are kind of like assisting many Turkish refugees coming from Turkey, from the persecution, and you answered like most of the questions. Thank you so much. And also you mentioned it was a nightmare, and it seems that you are awaking from the nightmare, and some of the policies are changing. Of course, it's not fully changed, but it's a positive act. And also you mentioned about the approach to refugees is more positive now, so which is great. Thank you so much. I would like to remind our viewers, if you have any questions to our speakers, you can post your questions or comments in the chat box, and we will respond to those questions during the Q&A session. Now, it is my pleasure to introduce and give the floor to our next panelist, Kelly Agnew-Barajas. Kelly is the Director of Refugee Resettlement of Catholic Charities Community Service at the Archdiocese of New York. As a refugee resettlement professional, advocate, and nonprofit leader, Kelly has worked in the refugee resettlement since 2016, overseeing services and support systems to thousands of refugees and asylee families. Kelly is experienced in program development, multi-level advocacy, and raising awareness on immigrant populations. Kelly earned a bachelor's in cultural studies from the New School and is currently completing a master's degree in organizational management and leadership at Hunter College. Kelly, in your presentation, I would appreciate if you focus on the challenges, conditions, and impact of the US border issues, which Pınar touched a little bit, and how that affected thousands of refugees in the US-Mexico border, and what was the zero tolerance policy introduced by the post-Trump administration and how it impacted on immigration policies and refugee admission to the US. And finally, please elaborate on your experiences, because you are in the field, your experiences on the implication of the COVID-19 pandemic on refugee admission, resettlement, family reunification, and overall immigration policies. Kelly, it's a pleasure to have you here. You have the floor.
Thank you so much, and thank you for inviting me. It's really an honor to be amongst all of you and to hear the breadth of experience that everyone has brought today. I just want to start off briefly by explaining some of the work we do at my office in New York. We cover both the city as well as the lower Hudson Valley. So we work with refugees, but also the primary group of people that we work with in our programs are people who've been granted asylum. And we also work with trafficking survivors, both children and adults, and a large number of unaccompanied minors who are seeking relief and then sometimes become an asylee, or depends on what status they might eventually get. The clients we work with are extremely diverse. In a typical year, between 60 and 75 or so countries are represented out of the 600 to 700 clients that we work with. They're also diverse in their backgrounds. So since we have journalists and Writers Foundation here, we serve people who have fled and been persecuted because of their work writing or making documentaries. People who are, both highly skilled, as well as people who, are still working in markets or more informal work in their countries. We serve a relatively significant number of, maybe 50 to 20% of our clients identify as LGBT. So, it's New York is a magnet. We work with people from all over. And I would also just mention that at least in the past, 5 or so years, about a third of our clients overall are from Central America. It's definitely become a large focus of the work in terms of where people are coming from. So we provide case management services, employment support, helping people to get on their feet. all sorts of education services, wherever, meeting someone where they are. So if someone needs, guidance at actually, a higher level, kind of like figuring out what to do, what are the steps they might take to go back to get their master's or something, as well as people who are pre-literate and need that kind of support and everything in between. And we work with a lot of clients that are kind of considered special populations, someone who might be a senior or youth who are granted on their own asylum case and whose parents are here but are undocumented, so mixed status families, people who have medical or mental health conditions. And we really work towards integration long-term. So we work with people sometimes 5, 6 years and up to hopefully through naturalization. So I'll briefly cover some of the issues that you had mentioned to try to touch on. The border region, as a result of what some of the other panelists have mentioned today, with MPP, or informally known as Remain in Mexico, were deplorable. Thousands and thousands of people in informal refugee camps that I think politically, the Red Cross wasn't called in, UNHCR wasn't called in, as they might be in a refugee situation in another context, because of perhaps, political embarrassment on the Mexico side. Like, why are we, don't call it a refugee camp, so then it's not a refugee camp, but it was. There were issues fundamentally with sanitation, with access to, clean water, access to really basic needs. And there were, thousands, again, children, vulnerable populations, very insecure. And this is really an ongoing problem, because although there's been a trickle of people admitted in that were impacted by MPP, there's many that are still not kind of processed. It's a little bit of a mess. I don't have a lot of detail to go into there, but we could definitely talk about that and kind of all the implications of that. I mean, really, it's been exacerbated by all of these other policies that Elizabeth went into and that Pinar went into with the third country bar, people not being admitted, like it started with metering, it started with kind of these baby steps towards like keeping people out. And when you stop up the works in that way, it's very hard to get that going and to have kind of a somewhat of an orderly system. Really going into a little bit on the zero tolerance fallout, that was extremely traumatic for obviously the clients, the parents, the children. I've recently just talked to some folks that worked in the ORR shelters during that time. And myself and my staff were still kind of processing what went down that year. I remember kind of being in a conference room amongst some of my colleagues, attorneys at the time, just expressing to each other that they had, young nonverbal children that they were tasked with representing who didn't know their last name. They don't know their parents' name. They know mama, they're too young to express what you need to express in order for the attorney to represent them. And they're like, how am I going to manage this? How are we going to handle this? And what parents had been told that, just horrific things that are really categorized as human rights abuses, to have been told that, your child will be given up for adoption, or, kind of basically forced to sign voluntary departure paperwork, not having any idea of what this information was about. So all of this, and just what Elizabeth had mentioned, I believe, that it was just so ad hoc, that we were tasked with reunifying families in a way that was just made it up on the fly, that the ORR shelters and legal professionals, we were literally like texting each other saying, I think these are some families that were just dropped off at this location or that location. It was very chaotic. And even now we're seeing, the slow work and laborious, painstaking work of trying to reunify parents and kids who were separated at that time. To go over the multiple other challenges, some are, were exacerbated by COVID, others are just ongoing challenges that we've had. But the courts having been closed, the asylum offices operating at a lower capacity, that's, we've not had the clients that we could have served even remotely, right? If we're kind of like somewhat working kind of remotely, somewhat in the office, but we're really eager to see at least that kind of that being turned back on so that the process can get going again. It's been very slow. One of the issues that I'm particularly concerned about, and this has been something I've worked on for a number of years, and I'm really happy to mention that MPI, the Migration Policy Institute, just published a commentary on this issue. I think it was 2 days ago, same day that the AB decision was reversed. So it was a very good day. That there was, there's not a system to formally inform asylees when they're granted where to go next. So there's no way that asylees are communicated to, especially from the court. What they receive from an asylum office is somewhat better. There's actually a little bit of information, it's in English. But from the court, it's like looks like a document that was printed on like a DOS 1985, computer. And there's no information on what they should do next. So as resettlement providers, we want to make sure that we're serving asylees, are refugees under the law. So this is a huge, huge gap. Number one, because we just don't know, we simply don't know who we're not helping, right? If the estimates are that only about 20% of asylees are getting connected with resettlement services, we don't know, are those other 80% completely self-sufficient and fine and don't need any help, no orientation? I really don't think that that's realistic. There may be a fraction who don't need lots of intensive support and speak English and have a job and on all of that, but there are people who really are disconnected. Even if they're very highly educated, they need assistance. They go to apply for university and are told you're not eligible to apply for financial aid because of your status. Well, that's not true. So we can play a role in almost any case as an advocate and as the provider of information and orientation. And mostly this is a solvable problem. The government already knows who is granted asylum, and they really just need to figure out a way to communicate this with resettlement providers or the states or the infrastructure that already exists. So I'm really excited that that was published. And I want to just echo the idea of undoing some harm that has been done. I mean, I talked about the extensive harm during zero tolerance. And Pinar also mentioned public charge. The impact that had was so pervasive. The fear that has been instilled into people there was already a lot of fear of public charge and misconceptions and myths and misunderstandings in certain communities, but it has been exacerbated. And it's really difficult to undo that work that is basically emotionally scarring on a fear level with so many people and communities. The other thing is just the way that under the Trump administration, policies were maybe on one hand promoted as being, for safety or for this or for that, but the underlying intent was really that they were designed to be malicious and harmful to immigrants in multiple ways. So for example, I'm thinking of the information sharing agreement between the Office of Refugee Resettlement and ICE. So they would say, we need to make sure that every single person in the house is, no waivers for fingerprints. And then they would share that information with ICE and try to pick up members of that household before the child was released to that home. So it was really very damaging in so many ways. I want to also, mention, can't go without saying that the damage having been done to the resettlement network, both in the United States, about a third of resettlement offices closed during the Trump era. So it's a time where, we could say that we're going to resettle 62,000 or 125,000 or whatever number we put out there, but the work has to be done to rebuild the capacity, to rebuild the infrastructure, the knowledge base, both at home, and then of course the overseas processing there's not been, investment in that over the number of years. So we really need to work on that in order to make those numbers actually achievable in reality. I don't know how much time I have left, Mehmet.
Yeah, maybe in a minute or so, if you can.
Okay, great. I just wanted to also highlight another piece of kind of new news is that the Central American Minors Affidavit of Relationship program was also just released. And this is kind of an exciting reopening of a program that had started under Obama and then was closed, allowing parents in the United States to apply for their children and as a way to enter the refugee program. And that was expanded, the announcement, we don't have information of what to do yet, but the announcement expanded that to people who have pending asylum cases and pending U visa cases. So that is really look out for more information about that. And it's really, in my opinion, here about the Biden administration starting to call the Central American, refugee crisis a refugee crisis, right? Because for a long time, it's like, it's not happening, it's something else, let's not label it that. Clearly people are fleeing. If they're fleeing because of domestic violence or gang violence, these are issues that we need to consider as, contributing to, the exodus of people because they indeed are not safe. And let's see. So yeah, I think I'm going to stop there and leave lots of room for questions. But I just want to highlight also the partnership we've had with Kathy and Hearts and Homes for Refugees, and we're super excited about building on the community co-sponsorship model and continuing to, involve communities as richly as possible into welcoming refugees into our communities. And we thank Kathy and her amazing team and network for all of their support these years and in the future.
Kelly, thank you so much. I mean, really the work that you do, and also the Catholic Charities Community Services doing a phenomenal job to assisting, helping refugees with their resettlement management or any needs that they need, when they are in the U.S. And especially, I think I would like to highlight one thing from your speech is that the children are the most vulnerable ones during this process. And when I was watching the children on the news, I think that's a heartbreaking situations that they are separated from their parents, and in some cases, I guess they don't have like a lawyer, or they don't have an interpreter to explain their fears and their situation. I think reversing all these policies will really make a big difference in the lives of the children. So thank you so much. We truly appreciate you and the Catholic Charities Community Service. Now I would like to go to our next speaker, and she's going to be our last speaker. Basma Alavi is the state refugee organizer at Florida Immigrant Coalition. Born and raised in Baghdad in Iraq, Basma came to the United States as a refugee in 2010. Leaving behind her career as an engineer at the Ministry of Oil at the government of Iraq. Her refugee story and activism have been featured in the media. Most recently, she was selected to be one of the Athena 40 women in the world, recipient of the 2019 One Jacks Humanitarian Award, and recipient of the EASE Award in 2020. For many years, Basma has served as the Florida refugee delegate for the Refugee Congress and was elected recently to chair the Opportunity for All National campaign. And in her presentation, Basma will share her perspectives on the U.S. immigration agenda and also the Opportunity for All program. Basma, the floor is yours.
Good afternoon, and thank you so much for having me. My name is Basma Alawi, and I am a former refugee from Iraq, and today I am the Florida refugee organizer with the Florida Immigrant Coalition. We are part of a national campaign called the We Are All America. I am happy today to share with you more about our work and how refugees now leading the work nationally and in many states. The We Are All America works to uphold and strengthen our nation commitment to welcome and protect those seeking freedom, safety, and refuge in the United States. We organize people across religion and cultural differences to build inclusive communities where we all belong. We have been organizing in the past 4 years refugees in many states, and all our organizers are refugees themselves who went through the refugee journey. We have launched earlier this year the Opportunity for All campaign. And the Opportunity for All campaign is a vibrant national campaign designed to shift social, political, and economic condition so that refugees can achieve their full potential. We likewise work to ensure America remains a nation of opportunity for those seeking freedom, safety, and refuge in the United States. We have 3 main goals. The first goal, to build the infrastructure for refugee power. 2, to achieve concrete organizing win through the Opportunity for All. And 3, to shift the refugee narrative. The Opportunity for All is supported by a larger coalition of We Are All America and national partners, including Alianza American, Church World Service, International Refugee Assistance Project, Refugee Advocacy Lab, Refugee Congress, Refugee Council USA, Refugees International, and Welcoming America. Many others have also lent their experience and expertise to the development of this campaign, including immigrants' rights movement in solidarity with refugees and asylees. I myself, I have been learning a lot as a former refugee on how to organize and learn from an immigrants' rights organization like the Florida Immigrant Coalition on how to organize our refugees and organize impacted and vulnerable communities locally. The Opportunity for All, led by refugees. I am the co-chair of the Opportunity for All, and my colleague Anahita Panahi, who is my co-chair and also the refugee organizer in the state of California. We have taken an active role in ensuring that the new administration restore and rebuild the refugee resettlement program. Since President Biden publicly announced to raise the admission goal to 62,500 for the year of 2021, a down payment on the promise of 125,000 refugee admission to the year of 2022, we have been holding the administration accountable through the delays in signing the presidential determination, to the surprising decision in early April to keep the admission cap of 15,000. We organized and coordinated with refugees leaders and national partners across the US to push back on the decision and ensure that we fulfill the promise to restore welcome. Some of our activities that we have carried include social media campaigns. Throughout the spring, we lifted the refugees' voices and stories calling upon the president to keep his promise, with messages of restoring welcome and keep your promise. Some examples of these can be found on our social media, the We Are All America, Facebook, and Twitter. We have also organized refugee-led letter to the President Biden. More than 260 refugees leaders across the US signed and delivered the letter to the president on the importance of upholding his promise to welcome 62,500 refugees in this fiscal year. The letter and other refugee leader engagement were covered in many media, including CNN, AP Media, Seattle Times Patch, Common Dreams, and others includes quotes from several of our campaign leaders. Refugee Matter series. In this past March, the Opportunity for All launched a Facebook Live series called Refugee Matters to engage the public on issues that affected refugees and asylees, address current events, and provide opportunities to take action following the early April announcement from the administration. We leveraged the Refugee Matters platform to respond and argue the president to reverse his harmful decision. You can also check all the segments on the Facebook and Twitter of the We Are All America. The Opportunity for All campaign also partnered with Refugee Council USA, We Are All America, and Refugee Congress to provide leadership training series for 2021 advocacy days, taught by refugees for refugees, across a range of topics including government one-on-one, storytelling, and best practices for meeting with elected officials. These training sessions provide timely opportunities to help new refugee advocates voice their support for refugee resettlement and the importance of keeping the promise to restore welcome. In this World Refugee Day, we are committed to uplifting and centering the diverse voices of refugees, asylees, and asylum seekers. Started on May 19th, each Wednesday, we have been having leading to World Refugee Day, our Restoring Welcome Refugee Matters series. We have been dedicated to uplifting the voices of vulnerable individuals that are often unheard, including Asian Pacific Islander refugees and immigrants, asylee and asylum seekers, LGBTQ refugees, unaccompanied minors, Black refugees, and stateless persons. I invite you to learn about these amazing stories and the work that they have been doing in each state in our We Are All America Facebook and Twitter. As a former refugee myself, I am so proud of the long way and long journey we have went through to make sure refugees in leadership position. We are proudly making a difference nationally and in many states. Thank you so much, and have a wonderful World Refugee Day 2021. And if you have any question, the moderator have my email and information so you can contact me at any time. Thank you so much and have a great day.
Thank you, Basma, for your presentation. And I know that Florida Immigrant Coalition is one of the civil society organizations helping refugees and immigrants. And your work is very important. Now we're moving to the questions and answers session. I would like to open the discussion for questions and comments made by our viewers. And if you would like to ask any questions to our speakers, please type your question in the chat box. And we have some questions and some comments. Our first question is from Joe Okumu, and his question is this: does the US have a comprehensive immigration law that the president is supposed to uphold? I don't know if any of the speakers have a response to this question.
I can answer in short that there's a lot of responsibilities the president has to uphold with regards to immigration. Unfortunately, there's hundreds of thousands of pages of a patchwork of regulations made over various years, each time sort of just fixing some things, making some things worse. Pinar was mentioning that there is a proposed bill to reform a lot of that holistically. The problem is in the United States, we have had a lot of trouble getting the Congress and the Senate in a place where we have enough people to agree to actually do that. And so over the years, it's just gotten sort of more and more patchwork. But there are, yes, basic guiding principles. There is the right to seek asylum as one very important overarching principle that is too often forgotten, and they look for excuses to deny that right instead of living with the spirit of upholding that. And hopefully we will see some progress in addressing it, and such as the moving from the terminology of just alien to non-citizen. I mean, that's how behind things are, but how we're seeing things slowly somewhat get better. So long story short, yes, there are things they're supposed to uphold, but no, there's not some sort of single law that governs everything.
think anybody wants to add to what Elizabeth said, or we can move on to the next question. So we have another comment and a question, and this question is for Elizabeth. She says, this is Cemre Ülker. She says, Elizabeth Gibson talked about the high number of refugees with pending asylum requests having community relations with the Turkish refugees. I know that countless of families are waiting for their interview schedules for so many years. This can be frustrating, especially for the asylum seekers with family reunification requests. I believe these long waiting periods are also pending refugees' successful economic and social integration to the society. So her questions, are there any actions that refugees can take to make this process faster? So what can the refugees do to help? And are there any upcoming policy adjustments to shorten the overdue waiting process?
Sure. So to be honest, the options for individual asylum seekers are very limited for speeding things up. And that's simply because obviously everyone wants their case to be heard faster. That said, there are a few small systematic changes in the works or that could be done that people can advocate for. The obvious thing that would speed things up is just hiring more asylum officers, judges, and ensuring more representation for people, because often if someone has a lawyer to hold the government accountable, they can at least make sure things are going as fast as they can go. That said, in terms of getting the government to go faster, it is important to not take too many shortcuts. There's also things can swing the other way. We want to make sure that new officers have sufficient training and the right qualifications to be making these kinds of decisions, and that we just aren't processing cases faster only to say no and denying asylum to people. Another thing that could be done is the last administration at the asylum office returned to a policy that's deliberately designed to discourage asylum seekers by making it harder for them to get work permits. And that is basically the logical way you would think to process applications would be the first person, say 3 people apply for asylum. Of course, you would give the interview first to the first person who applied. That's not how they've been doing it. They give it to the most recent person in the line because they want to try and make that decision before that person is eligible to apply for a work permit to discourage people from applying. It doesn't work like that. All it basically does is people end up getting in this growing backlog with their case never heard. And they really need to change it back to the old way of doing things. Another thing that could make a big difference is ICE, Immigration and Customs Enforcement, stipulating more to asylum cases in immigration court. A lot of the reasons for these backlogs also is because they were fighting us on every single silly little thing. Cases took longer. One case took longer because we had to argue a million things in what should have been a straightforward case. And I'll just end with one little thing that individuals can do to try and get themselves to a situation of stability a little bit faster. It's not going to necessarily get to asylum faster, but at least for the work permit. One of the things that the Trump administration did was they changed it so that instead of waiting 180 days for applying for a work permit after you apply for asylum, you had to wait a year. There's currently a proposal. One of the, I think, regulatory proposals is to switch that back so that there will be the shorter waiting time. But in the meantime, if someone becomes a member of an agency, of an organization called ASAP, ASAP, there's a court injunction and you can apply for your work permit using the old rules so that you can get it faster. And so that's something that individual asylum seekers can do, is go to the ASAP website, register to be a member. There's no fees or anything like that. And they have instructions on how to apply for that work permit faster. So it doesn't get asylum sooner, but at least you can support yourself and your family and have a little more stability.
Thank you, Elizabeth. Maybe Katie or Kelly, if you can answer the second part of the question, how can refugees engage with your organizations to help with this process, to fasten it?
So how can refugees participate in, can you just clarify what?
Yeah, I mean, how can, refugees, like engage with your organizations, to make these processes faster?
It's really challenging, I think, to make the processes faster, but I would, maybe Kathy wants to speak a little bit about how you've involved, the Speakers Bureau and refugees in advocacy more broadly. As Elizabeth mentioning, speeding up an individual asylum case is nearly, impossible. And advocating for refugee cases that are overseas before they're kind of like already in the pipeline is even more of a stretch. But Kathy, do you think that's appropriate to mention some of the work you've done there?
Well, I think I'd be happy to talk about it. I think they're asking is, how do they get that refugee status or asylum status, which, as you know, Hearts and Hopes for Refugees cannot process or push that out and assist there again. And as you said, that's not something you all can really do. But once refugees have been approved either as refugees and identified by Catholic Charities or another resettlement agencies for resettlement or assistance, they come to us through the resettlement agencies for the most part. And we are more than happy to put a team together to support them in our Helping Hands program or for resettlement through a community sponsor group.
Thank you. And maybe, what I can add to what you said, Katie, and sometimes some refugees are reaching out to us, either those who are waiting for their resettlement outside of the US, or they have one of their family members in the US and waiting for family reunification. So I think one of the challenges that they are facing during this time is that the consulates are not really, for processing the visas for these families so that they can come to the US, in a faster period of time. I think this is one of the challenges. And I think, for us, we have, written some letters to the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. I mean, not in the US, in Canada as well, they're reaching out to us, or to the State Department, writing letters. But of course, it's not easy, it's not easy. I think it's an internal process. And, the organizations just like you and us, we are not able to help much when the resettlement process is in. Maybe, let's go to the third question. And this question, maybe Pınar, if you could maybe respond to this question. And this is Rabia Normatova. And her question is this: thank you so much for this amazing virtual discussion. I have a question on the OPT and H-1B process. What is the better way to get into this process? And is there any new updates under the Biden administration? And her second question is this: the child is a US citizen, parents are not. Is it possible for parents to apply for refugee and citizenship program?
Okay, so the first part, I think she's asking how to get OPT or H-1B. So basically, you can get OPT after you complete a certain program based on an F1 visa. So first of all, you have to be on an F1 visa and you have to finish your program. And with the referral of your program advisor from the school or the extension program or whatever you are completing, you can apply for OPT, which gives you a chance to work in the United States for a year. And if you completed a STEM degree, which is science, technology, and engineering, it's more than 1 year. And H-1B is a special program that requires at least a bachelor's degree and designed to give employment opportunity for those who are going to work in the specialty occupation. So the definition of specialty occupation is basically a job that requires certain training, and also there should be a lack of US eligible workers in that field. Let me say we are in need of science and math teachers, engineers, doctors, attorneys that can be employed under H-1B, but some certain degrees which does not require a bachelor's degree cannot be employed under H-1B. But for H-1B, there's some certain caps that are only available on the month of April 1st, and there's always a lottery, so you can only apply when the cap is open. And within the last maybe 7 or 8 years, there's always a lottery. So once you get in the lottery, your application will be reviewed and adjudicated, and then you can get an H-1B visa. So that's a non-immigrant visa designed to give employment opportunity for those who has bachelor's degree, and it's only for 3 years, and you can extend it to additional 3 years, so which gives you to work in the United States for 6 years. And the second part of the question was, I think you have a child who is a US citizen, and can you apply for resettlement?
Yes, you have a child with US citizenship and parents do not have. Is it possible for parents to apply for refugee or citizenship program?
So any child who can petition for their parents has to be at the age of 21. So if your child is not at the age of 21, you cannot get citizenship through your child, unfortunately. So your child basically has to sponsor for you, petition for you. I think for the refugee resettlement, maybe Kelly or Kathy can answer better than me, but I don't, as far as I know, there is not a shortcut that gives you a refugee resettlement just because you have a US citizen child, unfortunately, as far as I know.
That's right. The affidavit of relationship that I mentioned before, which was the kind of the vehicle that is being adapted to for the purposes of processing, the reunifications from Central American minors and their parents here. The traditional affidavit of relationship, you have to be either a refugee or an asylee, and it's got to be within the first 2 years of that, the grant of status or the arrival as a refugee. So if you're a citizen, as Pinar said, you're most likely already just going to be able to apply through that process.
I do want to also just jump in really quick to add here, since it's not 100% clear what the circumstance of the questioner is asking, is I wanted to flag that there's something called the 10-year green card scam. And a lot of people believe that if they have US citizen children, they have a right to apply for a green card, and they'll be told, oh, you can get the 10-year green card. It's not a thing. It doesn't exist. And what happens is that basically, sometimes someone will apply for an asylum application without the person seeking the green card even knowing, and they end up getting referred to immigration court, where they can apply for something called cancellation of removal that they're not guaranteed to get, that is based on having a US citizen child. But we call that the application of last resort, because it is something you apply for when you are about to be deported from the United States. So it's incredibly risky. And there's unfortunately a lot of notarios or lawyers who abuse that process. There's correct ways to do it, but who abuse that process, and people end up getting in trouble. So I just want to warn anybody who has US citizen children to just be very cautious about that situation.
Thank you so much. Now we have another question from Kenya. This question is from Dr. Reginald Moldin Nalugula. And his question is about the Tigrayans in Ethiopia. So how do you make countries chasing away their own people account for human rights violations? The Horn of Africa, especially Tigrayans, need a voice to hear them out. Ordinary people have no quarrels. I don't know if any of you would like to respond to these questions. I think, like in the Tigrayan region of Ethiopia, there is a conflict between the armed groups and the government of Ethiopia. And unfortunately, in these type of conflict areas, women, children, and many people are being highly affected by these. And these people, unfortunately, they have to leave their hometowns and become refugees, and they leave everything behind. And so in these cases, of course, the government has to be, accountable to make sure that, people's lives are saved and they provide safety and security. It's a difficult situation. It's a new situation, and I think not many people know about it. But maybe what we can say, if you don't know about the Tigrayans issue in the Horn of Africa, just Google and look up on news and to learn about it and support them, because when there's a conflict or war or any armed conflict, that's the place where many people are becoming refugees, unfortunately.
May I add one thing here?
Sure.
As a comment. Actually, we represent many asylum seekers who are fleeing from the government persecution, unfortunately, and the best way may be raising awareness in the world for such issues. And I would like to thank Journalists and Writers Foundation for their research on those persecution, possible government persecution on their citizens. And I think while representing asylum seekers, we use those reports a lot. But more than that, I think the world should know what's going on in the other part of it, so that the governments won't feel free to do whatever they want. And maybe raising awareness among the refugees also can help to be hands to each other.
I think that's a good point, Pinar. And I personally happen to know Dr. Nalugula from Kenya, and they have a group of advocates who are raising awareness on this issue. And I will definitely share his contact with you, and to see if there's anything that we can help, with the refugees out there. And our next question is from Bahar Baidere from Texas. She says, "Wow, the new administration is like a breath of fresh air." And she's asking this question: "I was wondering if the service you provide includes counseling and perhaps connecting the refugees with their community." So maybe Kathy and Kelly.
So I can speak to what we do, and that is actually a really good question, because so many refugees come from situations, they're trauma infused, there's PTSD, they're from different cultures, the culture we have and the situations are so different that there is a great need. We do partner with different organizations, and one in particular in New Jersey called Cornerstone Counseling, which is a faith-based organization that does this kind of, it's not psychotherapy, but it is support for families in need. So we have worked with them, and we have worked in situations with families that have greater needs, circling back to Catholic Charities very often. And we will find that hospitalization if necessary. And in New York City, the hospital that's very good at this, but they're very backlogged, is, oh, Kelly, help me out.
We're talking about the Program for Survivors of Torture, or another?
Yes, okay. Yeah. So maybe
Belt.
Kelly wants to address more that they do. I'm sure that Catholic Charities has all sorts of networks and sources.
I mean, just briefly, one of our really amazing models that we wish could expand a lot really works in particular with the unaccompanied minors, but other people as well, is a partnership that Catholic Charities has with Montefiore that is called Terra Firma. So this really is, it's a medical legal partnership. So now my kids are home and making noise. So they are working on, physical health, like as well as mental health, with some small groups that are, there's kind of a boys group and a girls group, and things have changed a little bit during COVID. But there's also legal services, which is so needed. So let me tell my kids to be quiet. But I'll carry on. But basically, it's we don't provide clinical mental health services directly, but we refer.
Maybe
if I could,
one part of the question is, are you reaching out to the diaspora? Let's say if it's a refugee coming from Afghanistan and if there's an Afghan community in your area, so are you engaging these newcomers, these new refugees with the Afghan diaspora, let's say? I think that's one of the question is trying to link this.
So in Westchester County, there is an Afghan SIV resettlement community, and we have worked with them. Both the groups have resettled them, but we've made sure that there are ways for them to connect, and it's worked very well. I mean, socially, they share information, they assist each other with our help, and that's a very important part of resettlement, because everyone needs a community, and refugees arrive and they don't have the networks and they don't have the families. Many of them are family ties, so they're cousins or brothers, but bringing them together when they aren't is very important, and it makes a difference in how integrated and how, their long-term outcome.
I just wanted to very briefly flag that there are, especially the groups on this call, have wonderful programs and partnerships to place people, but counseling services and other supportive services is something that's horribly under-resourced. We struggle with it here in New York, and if New York is struggling with it with all the nonprofits and organizations and hospitals here, you know that asylum seekers and other immigrants in small rural communities are really struggling with it. And oftentimes there's resources for women and children, but I've found it personally incredibly hard sometimes to place adult single men who need that help and are just as traumatized as anyone else. It can be very hard sometimes to place them with services just because there's so much demand, and it needs more funding and more resources.
I would just echo that, especially with programs or capacity that's in the language that the client might need, even a language that's as common as Spanish, which is essentially our second language for many people here in the United States, is still very challenging to find. So it's a huge. It's not as though things are all fine. We do need to invest more in that area.
And also, I think, Kathy, your community sponsorship program is all about this, right? So you're reaching out to community members, either from your community, but from the community of the refugees, to support financial, psychological support to newcomers so that they can better integrate into the society and help with their language skills, life skills, or get a driver's license, get a job. So it's not easy. It takes time, but having someone caring for you, it really helps refugees have better experiences. Let's put it that way. We are a little bit running out of time. I would like to just end this session with one comment from Yusuf Temizkan from Pennsylvania. He says, "Thank you all for bringing issues pertaining refugees to the attention of public and answering questions vital for all asylum seekers." So, this is, like our end of the Q&A session. Before we do the closing, I would like to give maybe like a minute for each speaker for your final remarks or anything that you wanted to say, but you didn't have a chance. So I would like to start with Elizabeth. Anything that you would like to say?
I would just like to say that, as you've heard today, it's a very frustrating process, and a lot of damage has been done over the last 4 years, but it also has shown us how many people are willing to fight for refugees and immigrants, and how many amazing things they bring to our communities. And there is some sunshine on the horizon. We're starting to see progress. We're starting to see good things, but that doesn't mean we should just get complacent. It's important to stay involved and continue to advocate to do as much as we can to improve the situation for refugees and immigrants.
Thank you, Elizabeth, for your participation. Pinar?
I'm also seconding Elizabeth. It was such a frustrating process, and thank God it's over. And I would like to thank everyone who are doing advocacy on refugees and who are still fighting for refugees. And I really appreciate this program also bringing the importance of the issues for the refugees. Thank you.
Thank you, Pinar, for being with us. And Kathy?
Thank you. Thank you to everybody. I think this discussion has highlighted that no one organization, no one group of lawyers, no one good resettlement agency can solve this problem. We all have to continue advocating for policies and for the populations and the people we serve, because it's our humanitarian moral imperative. And I just want to make one more plug. You know, when neighbors come together, when they're trained as community sponsors, when they're given the opportunity to step up and to do one small good neighbor activity or build scaffolding as a group around a resettling family, refugees are more likely to thrive in safety, with dignity, and they integrate into the community. And this is how we can shift the paradigm of refugee welcoming and resettlement in this country.
Absolutely. Thank you, Kathy. And Kelly?
Thank you so much. It's been so wonderful to be with you all. And I'm actually going to lean on, since we didn't mention it yet today, the UNHCR's theme for 2021 for World Refugee Day, which is Together We Heal, Learn, and Shine. So this is kind of a nice way to just think about all that we've been through in the past year plus with COVID, the light that it's shined on our threadbare social safety networks, at least here in the United States, and the work that we have to do on that front that is so interconnected with our clients. Even if once they gain status, the kind of supports that they need, we need to really look at that and invest in helping people help themselves in kind of the cliche way to say it. But we don't want to, categorize, if you have this, you're eligible, and if this, you're not. It's like people, as we've seen during COVID, everyone is affected. Everyone needs healthcare. Everyone needs access to dignified, work and safe housing and clean water and all of these things that we want for ourselves and each other. So I'm gonna, leave it at that.
Absolutely, that is right. Thank you so much. And today we discussed the U.S. immigration agenda under the Biden administration on the occasion of the World Refugee Day 2021. Our distinguished speakers shared their perspectives on the immigration policies, challenges and opportunities for the refugees and their journey from immigration to naturalization and U.S. citizenship. Of course, COVID-19 impacted the refugee admission processes with delays and posed difficulties for refugees and immigrants during the pandemic. But however, we are hopeful that the new administration will make things easier. I would like to take this opportunity to thank our speakers for their remarkable presentations, as well as their advocacy and support for the promotion and protection of the rights of the refugees and immigrants. For our viewers, if you need any help, any guidance or legal assistance, you can reach out to the speakers and their organizations, as well as the JWF from our contact information, which is shared in the chat box. And finally, I want to thank our viewers for their contributions, for their questions to the discussion. And lastly, I would like to make an announcement of a documentary film. And today, as you know, we discussed the U.S. immigration agenda with distinguished experts, and the border security issue and the illegal migration is an important agenda for the U.S. However, we know that there is also a considerable influx of refugees coming from Turkey, Syria, Iraq, Afghanistan, to Europe to seek political asylum. To underline the life-threatening journey that millions of refugees are going through, we invite everyone to watch the award-winning documentary directed by journalist Thomas Sideris, The Muddy River of Bassem. This documentary is with scenes from refugee camps, reflects the 8-year route of the Kurdish refugee Rafik Davut, who is looking for his brother Basim Davut from Syria to Hungary, following the silent human river. Rafiq crosses 9 countries during this challenging journey and grows up during the refugee trek. The Muddy River of Basim is the official selection of the Thessaloniki Documentary Festival and semi-finalist at Africa Film for Impact Festival. The documentary will be available at the JWF's YouTube channel for public view exclusively for the World Refugee Day until the end of this Sunday. Thank you so much. Enjoy the rest of the day. And we have a short clip of this documentary for your view. Thank you and have a wonderful day.
الحياة في مكان آخر. أين؟ لا أعلم. أوروبا؟ الحلم؟ ماذا يوجد ما وراء أوروبا؟ الإله؟ لربما هناك أستطيع أن أرى أخي بسيم، عينيه، يديه وقدميه. بسيم لديه أقدام أكبر. هو اعتاد دائما أن يركض أسرع مني. أشهد أن محمدًا رسول
We want to thank our special thanks to Thomas Sideris. He's an amazing journalist, director, and producer. And also we want to thank Said Onal for producing this documentary film, which is an amazing way to raise awareness on the journey of refugees to safety and security. And thank you so much for our speakers and our viewers for joining us. And